Hello, it's Dawn Michelle and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to share with you, this is actually a really requested video, it's kind of funny, a little bit about how I work with the Tarot de la Nuit, which is I think a deck that a lot of people have seen and have expressed interest in but aren't really sure how they would actually incorporate it into their practice. So this is a deck that I haven't shown a ton and I haven't talked about a lot, but every time this deck makes an appearance on my channel, I inevitably get comments or messages, questions about how do I actually work with this deck. So today we're going to revise a little bit of my working with series, and I'm going to share with you really in depth about how I work with this particular tarot deck and specifically the oracle decks that I pair it with, because that's always a question that I get. So we're not going to do a proper walkthrough or anything because there are plenty of those online. Definitely go check those out if you haven't seen this deck and you want to see it in detail along with its little guidebook and all of that. I no longer have the box or anything that it came in. I've made a bag for it. And so this is not going to be the place for that kind of information. Today what we're going to be talking about is how I actually work with this deck. So before we get into all that, I actually want to talk a little bit about this deck. I do want to note it has no diversity. Everybody is very young, very slim, and very beautiful. That to me is something that you kind of have to overlook in the work with this deck. It's something that kind of took me a moment to be okay, that's a thing in this deck. I know that going in. However, there is certain work that I think this deck is really well attuned to, and I have really found it to be quite an in-depth read, and it does work really well in some very specific instances in my practice. But I think it is important to know that going in, because you're not necessarily going to see the real world reflected in this deck. Like here, we're in Alice in Wonderland. This deck very much has fairy tale vibes. There's a lot of pop culture references in here as well. You might have seen the sort of Jon Snow kind of energy. We had the sort of Brad Pitt interview with the vampire thing going on. And that to me is one of the things that I actually do like about this deck, is because it ties in those associations for me and I'm able to work with those and incorporate those into my practice. So once you kind of overlook the whole body beautiful aspect of this deck, I think it really does have a lot to offer. It has a very unique energy and it does something a little bit different than a lot of the other decks in my collection, because it is sort of a fairy tale deck, but it's like Julie describes it, it's a cosplay deck. So it's not real fairy tales, it's dressing up pretending to be fairy tales. It is taking the fantasy and it's putting it on and it's exploring it and it's adopting it as its persona. But there's depth here. There's more going on than just that top layer that you see. And I think this deck works really, really beautifully for that. And so it is one of the reasons why, despite the super young, body beautiful, everybody looks like they stepped out of a magazine, people in this deck, I have found it to be really a quite potent reader, because I'm looking past that, I'm getting beneath the surface. And this is one of those decks that I feel kind of encourages us to go deeper, because if you just take this deck at surface level, right, you're not gonna, I don't think, see a lot here. Yeah, there's some fairy tale, and yeah, we can kind of get some Two of Swords energy here, is very Little Mermaid, right? I can pull all of that in on a very surface level. But if I get beneath the beautiful, if I get to the raw grittiness that exists underneath this, then that's where I find the depth and the energy and the true voice of this deck. That's where it comes through for me, is when I take the time to go deeper. Now, there are some decks in my collection that I do just kind of read at that surface level, where I'm just yep, it's the 10 of Cups and means this, and we're just going on with that and there's nothing more to it. But with this particular deck, I feel like there is more to it. I feel like there is more beneath the surface. And I think it kind of gets overlooked. And I think it is, in a sense, an underrated deck because I think people do judge this deck by its cover, right? They do judge it by the artwork and just going, yep, it's young, it's beautiful, it's pretty, and therefore it has no substance. And I don't think that's necessarily the case with this deck. I feel like there is a lot going on in the cards, and I feel like there is a lot to dive deep into when we're working with this deck. Particularly, I think, in the ways that I've been working with it, because when I work with this deck, I lean into that very heavily. That is the underlying theme, that is the substance that's beneath the sort of mystical, magical, fairy tale kind of layer. It reminds me a little bit of how today we have the Disney-fied fairy tales, right? That on the very surface level are all happy and, you know, like the boy always gets the girl in the end and all of that kind of stuff, right? But beneath that, where those fairy tales came from is a very different, darker place. And I feel like that is kind of the essence of this deck. Like, there is way more going on here beneath the surface. It might be pretty at the top level, but when you dig down, it's a little bit nitty gritty. It's a little bit shadowy. And it's got a lot of heart, despite its sort of pop culture, Disney-esque sort of top layer. So now that we flipped through all the cards, let's actually have a little bit of a play, and I'll show you how I've been working with this deck and some of the readings that I've been doing with it. You know, cardstock wise, it's not my favorite. It's still, even to this day, pretty stiff. It is that thicker, low scarabeo cardstock. It's quite glossy. It's definitely not my favorite. I feel like it is a little bit longer, so I do have a little bit more of a stretch to get my hands around it. Whoops. But for the most part, like, I can shuffle it. It inevitably never fails when you get on camera. You totally will mess up any shuffle because now people are watching. I can shuffle it. It's not the most comfortable shuffle in the world. I do actually find that it overhands better because it's kind of glossy. And if I do it long ways like this, I'm able to overhand it a little bit more. So it's not my favorite in terms of a shuffle. The backs are beautiful though. But let's talk about how I've been working with this. Like, Jon Snow. I don't mind decks that do that though, if it's in the context of the deck and it works for me here. So let's talk about the first Oracle deck that I feel like is kind of I guess a little bit of a no-brainer for pairing with this. And it's its sister Oracle, which is the, woo, shiny. Let me catch it in the light there. The Oracle deck by the same, I do believe, creator and artist, so I think it's the same team. This deck features the exact same kind of artwork, the exact same kind of art style, but this definitely relates to the fairy tale aspect. So you see we have Beauty and the Beast here, we have the Snow Queen, Peter Pan, and so when I work with it with its sister deck, which is not actually something I do very often with my Tarot and Oracle decks, right? I usually, even though I have a lot of decks that are like by the same creators or the same artists or whatever, a lot of times I'm like, I don't want to pair them together because it's too much of the same on my table. But in this particular work, in this particular sense, I think this works really well because what this does is help me to tie that fairy tale energy into my work with this deck. And so here we have the Spirit of Magic. You know, I might get into the little guidebook. It's actually not bad. That sounds terrible, but it's actually not bad for a little low scarabeo oracle. It talks about the story of the fairy tale and the message. So this one is, I do believe in fairy tales. Like, what a great message to start with. Like, where can you invite that magic into your life? And then I look here to my Six of Pentacles and my Knight of Swords. And I love that I can add that layer in if I want to of, this does feel like Jon Snow to me. So do I want to tie that layer into that, his story, into my work with this? And when I'm looking at the cards in this way, it really then becomes about the story that these cards tell me. And I can dive into that as my focal point. So when I really want to engage with this particular tarot deck through that fairy tale lens, I can pair it with its sister fairy tale oracle deck and really get into the nitty-gritty of that, really dive into the story aspect of it. And I think in that respect, like, they do actually work really well together. I do tend to use it just in these 3-card configuration here, particularly with its sister oracle, because there is a lot going on in these cards, and I don't want to feel like there's just so much on the table that I can't find the story within it. So I do tend to focus on that. Like, this is interesting. We have Jack and the Beanstalk here, and it's between the Emperor and the Moon. So Jack is kind of like taking on this emperor energy, this emperor persona, where he's like, I'm going to go and I'm going to do what it is I want to do, and I'm going to climb that dang beanstalk, and I'm going to get what I want at the end of this journey, right? He's very much stepping into that emperor energy. But here we have the moon, and in this sense, the moon often kind of has this sense of illusion about it, where we're not really always seeing the full picture, and that's definitely the case when Jack gets to the top of the beanstalk, right? So I can look at that, I can tell that story, I can see where these cards, the tarot energy relates to that story, and I can see where that story might apply in my life and what I have going on. I love this Evil Queen card. I think that she's pretty cool. We're looking at, you know, the Evil Queen between the 10 of Cups and the Star. Again, I can tie in that energy of the persona of the Evil Queen, right? From Snow White, she's got her magic mirror behind her. Like, she's trying to create this 10 of Cups situation, but at what cost, right? And this is where I think that deeper layer comes in, because to me, this, being that this is the Evil Queen card, this reading, this 3-card configuration just took a very shadowy turn, because to me, I associate that with you're trying to create, you're trying to manifest something, but at what cost are you doing it at? Is it the cost of your own self, the cost of someone else? And when we look at this 10 of Cups, now I start focusing in on the shadows. I start focusing in on like the look on her face. There's this light glowing here, kind of bringing us a sense of maybe there might be something good coming through there, but like, she doesn't look all that happy. And then over here we have the Star, and this figure looks younger. So this to me is saying, like, maybe there might be some issues there to do with some inner child work, or maybe even some things from childhood that are pulling in this. This is also an evil stepmother, right? We have that sort of an energy that we can pull in and tie into these particular cards in this particular story here. And this is where I think we can really get into that depth, where, you know, there's more going on here than just what we see on the surface. So I do really like pairing it with its sister oracle deck to create these stories, to tie in that energy of the fairy tale itself with the actual cards that I'm seeing. And I think it does work really, really beautifully. Here we have Little Red Riding Hood between the High Priestess and Judgment. I mean, that's beautiful, right? So I can really work to pull that story together and to see where it applies in my particular life. I love this 8 of Pentacles. It's one of my favorites in the deck. So that's definitely one way that I work with this tarot deck, is to really dive deep into the fairy tale aspect of it, and to use the sister deck to focus in on the particular fairy tale, that particular story, and using the tarot to flesh that out, and then to suss the story and the message from that, and then apply it to my life. So a more recent pairing that I've been playing with is the Gateway of Light Activation Oracle. This is an oracle deck that I've been working with quite a few of my decks, and working in a particular practice. For this one, what I've been using these 2 decks for is the Gateway of Light creates a portal, and it's showing me what I need to access that is on a greater level. So when I add that sort of cosmic energy to the sort of illusionary fantasy world of the Nuit Tarot, then I can kind of look at where I'm experiencing some of that illusion that may not actually be in alignment with what it is that I'm trying to create. So here we have the Akashic Records with clearing old stories, releasing past lives, and freedom. We have the 3 of Cups. This could be our old story, right? This could be what it is that we need to release from our past life. That idea of sort of the perfect little tea party, right? Maybe we get caught up in that Three of Cups moment and we can't move on. We can't learn from that experience, and we can't get to this point of the Two of Pentacles, of this leaving, this freedom that we see kind of depicted here, where, you know, she's on a time limit, but she's making the decision and she's doing the thing, right? And so this kind of gives me that look at, again, that deeper layer of a little bit into the shadow with this particular reading, but it does kind of depend on how the cards come up. So here we have the Divine Matrix, interconnectedness, synchronicity, and God incidence, not coincidence, God incidence, which is an interesting keyword. And we have it paired between the Wheel and the Two of Wands. So I might look at the idea of, you know, where is fate, destiny kind of playing a hand in my life? How is that connecting to the decisions that I'm making now? And where might I be in this particular instance kind of adopting or putting on a persona that maybe isn't fully in alignment with what I'm trying to access here in the Gateway of Light? So the Gateway of Light for me is really, it's a portal deck. It's giving me an access point into something greater than myself. And the Nuit deck really helps me to understand, like, in a sort of shadow sense, like what might be preventing me from doing that, because I do think that this deck is actually a great deck for some of that quote unquote shadow work. It works really well for me in that way. So we have the Stellar Gateway Activation, Infinite Potential, Manifestation Vortex with the Tower and the Six of Swords. Like, stuff's gotta fall apart. You gotta let the old fall apart so that you can step into this portal of infinite possibility, that gateway activation of manifestation, and you got to leave behind the stuff that's not serving you, right? And maybe holding on to this energy is what's preventing the access into this particular portal. So I think it works really well for this. I love the portal deck, the Gateway of Light. I'm going to do a video on it itself as well, because it's definitely something that I've been working with and I've used in quite a few different ways with quite a few different decks. I do think that aesthetically it works beautifully with the Nuit deck. It has a sort of cosmic-y, fantasy-esque energy to it that feels like it really does resonate on the same kind of wavelength of the Nuit deck. And in this particular pairing, I feel like the tarot deck actually feels more like the shadow side and the Gateway of Light feels like the light side. So I feel like I'm getting this really interesting balance between light and shadow. But really what's coming through this particular work is seeing what I need to access and what's preventing me in most cases from doing that. So where am I kind of adopting these personas, or maybe dressing up to try and achieve something, but it's not actually what the real reality of the situation is, because the Nuit deck for me isn't about reality. It's at all. It's about the kind of the personas, the dressings that we put over the top of everything because we don't want to deal with what's going on in the present, or because you know, I mentioned it in the true self journey as, you know, it was a deck that when I felt like I was adopting personas because I didn't know who I was, right? And so this deck to me very much serves in that way and for that purpose, where I can use it to kind of look at where am I cosplaying my own life, right? And using it in particular with the Gateway of Light, this is what I'm trying to access, and this is kind of the shadow of what's preventing me from doing so. And you'll see that as I swap out decks here, it's going to change the energy and the work that I do with the Nuit deck. So I think that that's really cool. And I love when decks give me that kind of a very versatile energy and work with it. This is beautiful. Star Gathering, stars aligned, remembering home and soul family between the Five of Swords and the Eight of Wands, right? Remembering family can sometimes be difficult. And sometimes we have to go through those hard times, those struggles to get things into alignment so that we can get to this Eight of Wands moment of that moving forward, of gathering the energy that we need. I think that's really beautiful. So another deck that I like to pair this this tarot with is the Divine Circus Oracle. And this one I think gives a really sort of interesting type of a reading, because this is, as it says, the deck of sacred subversion and creative confidence. So this is a deck that really encourages me to look at where can I step out of my own comfort zone, and the tarot deck then helps me to figure out where in my life I need to do that or how I might go about that process. So it's a really interesting little pairing in that sense. Occasionally the key words don't mean much to me on this deck, and I will have to get into the guidebook, but a lot of times I will just work with the deck very intuitively and see what the imagery is telling me. I do think that they are also aesthetically very cohesive. We do have a similar kind of color palette, a similar kind of energy going on. But here we're looking at, how can I step into this nebula warrior energy? And I'm looking at the Seven of Cups and the Page of Swords. So that's going to kind of give me some indication as to maybe some of the things that I need to sort of let go of, because this Seven of Cups feels very much like you're in that emotional space and you're maybe too tapped into it. Maybe you need to step outside of that emotional energy a little bit, and maybe you need to bring that in a little bit of that sort of balance with that swords energy, kind of the heart and mind kind of thing coming together in this nebula warrior. It's again a deck, more of a pairing that I would need to get into the guidebook more often to kind of see what's going on. But I do think like the pairings are really beautiful. Here we have Duke of Shadows. Again, that title doesn't mean anything to me, so I would have to get into the guidebook or really read the deck intuitively. But this to me feels very much like embodying that kind of dark, shadowy energy in a very positive way. And here we see it with this beautiful Eight of Swords. She's laying on the clock there, and it feels very much almost like she's bound and restricted by time itself. And this Duke of Shadows is kind of telling me, step out of that, get out of that, and bring into balance here that kind of light and shadow aspects of the self. Like you're too far into one side, you need to balance it out a little bit, and that's going to bring this beautiful light and shadow balance that we see here in the Duke of Shadows. Again, I have no idea what it says in the guidebook, totally going off intuition here. Even though it is the Duke of Shadows, like there's a lot of light here too. So this is all about kind of stepping away from the being too locked into one way of being and opening up to a new world. And I think that that's really cool. It's just a kind of different way of looking at it. Sometimes the messages are a little bit harder for me to access from the Divine Circus. They're not always on the forefront for me, and sometimes I have to work at it a little bit more. But generally, if I get into the guidebook and I spend a little time with it, something usually will come up for me. These are also instances where color will play a very key part in the way that I read the cards. So like here we have this Circus of Love, and it is very much a red card. Red is definitely the focal point. It's the background. She's accented in red. And so I might look to these two cards to see where is the red pulling me through. So we have the Circus of Love with the Queen of Swords, and we can see there's this red glow that kind of runs across the cards, connecting them together. We see it in the firelight here and also in the lamp of the hermit. So this is telling me like that Circus of Love, tap into your own inner self, your own sense of playful love for self by speaking your truth, being who you are in that Queen of Swords moment, but also honoring those parts of you that you are still seeking, that you're still finding. Like there's a balance in there. And I think that's a lot of what comes through with this particular pairing. It's a lot about balancing energies for me, because just the way that these cards tend to fall together, the messages, the way they tend to come about for me, is like this is the energy I'm trying to tap into, and these are the two kind of opposing energies often that I need to bring into balance in order to do that. It's a circus, right? It's a balancing act, and it does feel a bit like trying to get past the spectacle to see what's really going on beneath the surface. And I do think that it works quite well for that. Honestly, this isn't one that I've used that much. It's probably my least used combination and pairing with the Nuit deck. but it is one that I have worked with a couple of times, so I definitely wanted to just give it a little bit of a mention. So the last pairing that I have for you is the Earth, Moon, and Shadow Oracle. Now, this is a fairly new little pairing and practice that I've been working with these two decks because this is a fairly new deck in my collection. And what I like to do is look at the Oracle deck, the Earth, Moon, and Shadow, as what is the underlying energy, and then I look to the tarot to tell me what is kind of on top of that. So we've got what's going on beneath the surface, and then what is kind of at that surface level and then elevated above in the Nuit deck. So we have the Pathfinder with intelligence, keen insight, and premonition. Sometimes, as you've seen me do with other things, I will lay 3 cards from the Nuit deck so that I can pull a card for each of those keywords. And that works really beautifully too. But I feel like this is kind of telling me the Pathfinder. I've got the Queen of Pentacles and the 3 of Wands here. So this is telling me that like what's unrealized right now is me stepping into my own path, into me honoring that. We have the Queen of Pentacles. If you watch my channel, you know that's kind of one of my personal significators. And then we have the 3 of Wands. This is really would be a reading about stepping into my personal power, as in maybe I'm not currently doing that to the extent that I need to be. And I do think that although the artwork isn't always aesthetically the most perfect match in the world, I do find that the messages actually work really well together. So here we have Winding Roots, Ancestral Connection, Earthly Wisdom with the 9 of Pentacles and the 10 of Pentacles. That's really interesting. So I feel like this little combination here actually does work well for kind of like what is unrecognized or unresolved within my life. So kind of more in that shadow energy, and then pairing it with the Nuit deck to show me kind of where I need to step into that, how I'm currently embodying that, or what I need to do to actually bring that into the consciousness awareness, into realization, manifest that energy in a way that is in alignment with who I actually am. And that's a lot of the work that I do with the Nuit deck in general, is just kind of working on stripping away the layers, right? To me, this deck is all about the layers and where I need to strip those things away and how do I get beneath that surface layer. So here we have Shadow and Light with Demons, Shadow Self, and Integration between the 3 of Pentacles and the 9 of Cups. I think that's quite beautiful. Earthing with grounding, centering, and connection between the Chariot and the 7 of Wands. This is really interesting because what is unrealized at this point, what has not been brought into awareness, is that deeper connection, that slowing down, that getting still. Again, it's like in a shadow position, as in it's unrealized potential at this point. It's not necessarily bad. It's not a negative thing. It's just unaccessed, unrealized. And we have movement in these 2 cards. So with the Chariot and the 7 of Wands, both of these feel like there's just too much energy going around. I'm moving too fast. I need to stop. I need to reground. And that is what it's going to create, that earthing, that grounding, that centering that I'm currently needing, that unrealized energy in my life. And I feel like the movement that's being expressed here in the Nuit deck is telling me, you're going too fast. You're doing too much. You need to slow down. So this is kind of what's actively going on, right? Where do I need to make those changes in order to bring this potential into realization or into my conscious awareness? And again, like I said, the artwork doesn't always like align beautifully, but I think the messages really do. I think the energy does quite well. So we'll just flip through a few more. This is a beautiful one. She kind of mimics the oak. She kind of mimics the roots. I think that's great. Kind of a balancing of those energies there. Spirit and Matter with the Page of Wands and the 6 of Wands. Very wandsy energy there. This one's beautiful with the Blue Moon, the 4 of Cups, and Temperance. I mean, that I think is a beautiful reading right there. Looking at this is what we need to be accessing, and this is maybe where we currently are and what we need to be tapping into to get there. So that's kind of a look at some of the ways that I've worked with this particular tarot deck. Again, like it has its shortcomings, right? There's no perfect deck out there. It definitely has some things that give me a little bit of pause. But really, I think what this deck does really beautifully is it gets beneath the surface, the beautiful surface, right? And it goes deep if you take it there. It's definitely a deck that you can just throw out and read as a traditional Rider-Waite-Smith in any sort of a reading, and it does work quite well for that. There have been times when I've just been like feeling like I need to tap into this kind of an energy, and I just want to step into this world for a little bit, and I'll do some readings with it on a very surface level. It does work that way as well. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with working with this or any deck in that way on a very surface level. I can just look at the beautiful pictures and I can create my little story, have my little reading, and go on with my day. That is definitely a way that I've worked with this deck as well. But this deck, I think, has the potential to be more if you allow it to. There is a lot going on here beneath the surface, and I think if you kind of get past that beautiful book cover aspect of it, there's a lot of depth in here. There's a lot of light and shadow as well. And this deck is really wonderful for calling me out in the ways and places in my life where I am maybe not being quite so authentic with myself, right? Where I'm kind of like cosplaying my own life, right? I'm dressing up and playing the part, but I'm not necessarily feeling it. It does a really wonderful job of calling that out. It does a really wonderful job of also telling me, like, how do I address that, right? It's not just about calling me out on all of my shadowy stuff. It also gives me something to move forward with, something to do with that energy. I acknowledge it, I accept it, and then I move on from it. And then depending on the oracle decks that I pair it with, right, that can also shift the energy, and that can determine the type of reading that I do with it and how this deck actually functions for me. And that's one of the reasons why I really do like pairing my tarot and oracle decks together, because depending on what decks I put together will completely change the context of a reading, and then it will completely change the practice and the way in which I use it. I do think that pairing it with its sister oracle is one of my favorite ways to work with it, because I love really diving deep into that fairy tale aspect. I think there is a lot of really good work that can be done there, but I also really enjoy pairing it with the Gateway of Light activation. I think those are my two favorite pairings. The Gateway of Light, I use that deck a lot in a lot of different readings with a lot of different decks to access different portals and different energies. And this deck works really well for that particular work that I do with it, in kind of looking at, I want to step into this energy and what's kind of stopping me from that, right? Where am I maybe not acting in alignment with what's really going on beneath the surface? And I think that's really the treasure of this deck. And like, it's probably one of the more underrated decks, I think, in my collection, because I think a lot of people see it and they take it very much at surface level. And because it's not a perfect deck, right? But they take it at that very surfacey, fantasy magazine kind of beautiful people level, and you don't get beneath the surface of that. And then you don't see, like, I think the value that lies within that, and the depth and the work that can be done with a deck like this. So I think if you want it to be dark and deep and meaningful, it can be. And if you want it to just be, some chick in her bikini, it can be that too. So in that way, it's actually quite a versatile little deck in my collection. It is beautiful. I mean, like, the colors are gorgeous and I really do enjoy working with it. But I do think that there is quite a bit of depth here as well. And it's a wonderful one that I think that doesn't probably get quite the attention that I think it kind of deserves because of what it looks like on the surface. And I think that this is an excellent deck to kind of illustrate, don't judge a book by its cover, right? Because you really don't know what's going on beneath the surface until you open the pages and get inside and you do the work. So that is a look at how I've been working with and have used the Tarot de la Nuit, some of the tried and true oracle decks that I've been pairing with it for quite some time, including its sister deck, and some of the newer decks and some of the newer readings and types of practices that I've been using in my work with this deck. I would love to know, if you have this deck, what your thoughts are on it, so please feel free to share with me in the comments below. As always, you'll find links for everything I've shown here in the description box of this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to sharing with you again soon.